What pins the value of a human being to the board, like a butterfly under glass? Is it the digits glowing in their bank account, the shine of their shoes, or the title stapled to their business card? For Nathaniel Harrington, who could casually sign off on the purchase of 3 city blocks without glancing at the bill, the answer had always been success. The kind measured by quarterly reports, by towers named after him, by other men's envy. At least that was the answer until one sodden night when he wandered into a forgotten alley of the city he practically owned, only to meet a ghost wrapped in an apron, someone who had once rivaled his fire and ambition. That chance meeting would unearth a past he had carefully buried and start a chain of events wild enough to gut the empire he thought unshakable. What he did in that moment wasn't charity. It was the first thunderclap of a coming storm. The sky over Seattle was not in the mood for subtlety. This wasn't the famous mist that clung politely to sidewalks and made umbrellas a luxury item. No, the heavens had chosen percussion, a hammering rain that pounded rooftops like an angry drummer and blurred the city into a bleeding watercolor of neon and asphalt. From 58 floors above, inside the sterile cocoon of the Rainier Summit Tower, Nathaniel stood before a wall of glass and watched the downpour dissolve the world into streaks of color. Below, traffic inched and pedestrians scurried, but all he could hear was the rain thrumming against reinforced panes and the dull electric hum of climate control. For all his wealth, the silence pressed down on him like a lid. At 32, Nathaniel Harrington had managed the trick of gilding his own prison. His company, Synapse Dynamics, had broken open the riddle of data compression and made him obscenely rich before he'd blown out 30 candles. His life had accumulated the expected trappings, assets that could outpace the GDP of a developing nation, a garage full of vintage automobiles he never bothered to ignite, and a contact list filled with people who smiled for cameras but bared teeth in boardrooms. He possessed everything except appetite for people, for parties, for the performance of wealth. The one thing he lacked was any desire to endure the gala his name was plastered on that evening. The thought of another ballroom dripping with rented chandeliers, another lineup of hollow conversations and champagne poured too warm, curdled in his gut more than any stock crash. The silk at his throat knotted tighter, his Tom Ford tie more like a noose than an accessory. He tugged at it, irritation sharpening. Into his phone he muttered, "Cancel my appearance at the fundraiser, Jessica. Tell them I'm stuck on an unavoidable call with Singapore." His voice was flat, the kind of tone that didn't invite questions. Jessica, efficient to the point of sainthood, didn't miss a beat. "Understood, Mr. Harrington. Shall I have Chef Antoine prepare dinner here instead?" "No," Nate said, after a beat of silence. A curious impulse sparked, one he couldn't quite name. "No, I'll take care of it myself." That silence on the other end wasn't accidental. Nathaniel Harrington did not take care of it himself. He hadn't set foot in a grocery store in years. But she swallowed whatever surprise she had and only replied, "Of course." He hung up, slipping out of his suit jacket. In its place, he dragged an old black rain slicker off a hook, a relic from his college days that still smelled faintly of wet canvas. He jammed a baseball cap low over his brow, left his sleek wallet behind, and instead stuffed a few $100 bills into his pocket like a man preparing to bribe fate. He wanted anonymity, wanted to vanish into the city he was supposed to command. The elevator whispered him downward, 58 floors in less time than it takes to change a mind. When the doors sighed open, the lobby greeted him like a cathedral built to impress visiting gods. Marble polished to a weapon's shine, potted arrangements that seemed to sneer more than welcome, lighting calculated to flatter but not comfort. George, the doorman, stiff as a Marine and nearly as loyal, hustled forward with an umbrella wide enough to cover a small army. "Mr. Harrington, your car is waiting," George said, posture perfect. "Not tonight, George." Nate tugged his cap lower. "I'm walking." Before the man could sputter protest, Nate stepped into the storm. Cold rain smacked his face like a wake-up slap, seeping through expensive denim, soaking into the leather of shoes hand-stitched in Florence. The discomfort felt almost holy, like a baptism back into the real world. He walked with no plan, each puddle a defiance, each gust of wind reminding him he had skin. Michelin-starred restaurants glowed behind windows where valets smoked under awnings. Trendy bars pulsed with bass and laughter. Broadway theaters disgorged sleek crowds in satin gowns and bespoke suits. And none of it tugged at him. He kept walking, turning where the streets grew meaner, where the gleam of glass towers gave way to bricks rubbed raw by time. The air here carried the iron tang of wet concrete mixed with fried food oil gone stale. He didn't know what he was searching for until he saw it. Wedged between a laundromat humming like a hive and a boarded-up bookstore sagging under mildew, a neon sign sputtered half-dead letters into the storm. The Corner Spoon. The word corner had long since lost its R, flickering as Corn SPO. The glass front was fogged with steam, silhouettes shifting inside, promises of warmth in defiance of the rain. It was the sort of greasy spoon he hadn't stepped into since Saturday mornings with his father, back when bacon and burnt coffee smelled like luxury. Before he could think better, he pushed the door. The bell above chimed with a meek jangle. Heat wrapped him instantly, thick with grease, percolated coffee, damp wool coats hanging from hooks. Vinyl booths bore the scars of decades, patched with duct tape or left to gape. A pair of truckers hunched over meatloaf. A student in a hoodie pecked at a keyboard, earbuds sealing him in. An old woman with a trembling hand nursed tea as if it were medicine. Nate slid into a booth at the back, the red vinyl sighing beneath him, and picked up a laminated menu warped from years of spilled coffee. The prices were relics. He could have bought the entire contents of the kitchen with the bills in his pocket. "Be with you in a sec, hun," a voice called over the rattle of dishes. Nate looked up. The world tilted. She was wiping down a table, her motions practiced but heavy. The kind of economy born of long shifts. A black polo too big for her clung damp at the sleeves, the diner's logo stitched in thread unraveling at the edges. Her blonde hair, dulled but still honey in the fluorescence, was knotted in a ponytail that had surrendered strands to sweat and gravity. Her face, thinner, cheekbones sharpened by years, faint lines radiating from eyes that once blazed, was unmistakable. And those eyes, green as spring moss, and just as startling, were exactly as he remembered. Adele Bennett. The name hit him like a punch. Memory broke its dam. Northwood High, class of 2011. She had been his mirror and his opponent, his sharpest edge. They had dueled over calculus and physics, argued through debate club until the judges were grinning, then walked away smoldering but begrudgingly respectful. She had the audacity to be brilliant at everything, doodling sketches so alive in her notebook margins they seemed to breathe, even as she solved equations most of their peers couldn't fathom. She had once spoken to him about art with such fire that he, the math prodigy, had been both fascinated and terrified. She had been bound for RYSD, set to be a painter, a designer, a star. And he, coward that he was then, had nearly asked her to prom before retreating into his shell of equations and ambition. The moment passed, as so many moments do, lost to the archives of regret. Now here she stood, not holding a brush or sketching dreams, but balancing chipped plates. Hands he remembered as delicate tools for charcoal and graphite were now marked by burns, small scars that spoke of grills and hot pans. She leaned toward a trucker with tired courtesy, offering a refill. The brilliance that once could have lit galleries was serving hash browns. His throat constricted. She scanned the room, her gaze skimming over him, pausing for a fraction of a second. Did she know? His heart slammed like it wanted out. He ducked his head behind the menu, a billionaire hiding behind laminated eggs and bacon specials. He risked another glance. No, her eyes had already moved on, her face back in its mask of tired civility. Of course, she didn't recognize him. The lanky boy with nervous hands was gone, replaced by a man who signed billion-dollar contracts. He almost wanted her not to recognize him. The truth of it scared him. She approached his booth with a notepad. "Sorry about the wait. What can I get for you?" Her voice carried that same undercurrent of warmth, even buried beneath exhaustion. Up close, the details sharpened. Shadows under her eyes, a faint scar on her forearm from an old burn, nails clipped practical. He felt a wave break inside, anger at the injustice, pity for what she endured, grief for what she'd lost. The world had wronged her. Cosmic imbalance. "Coffee," he said, voice rougher than intended. "Black." "Coming right up." She scribbled without a glance, pivoting back toward the counter. He watched her go, mind spinning with questions sharp as knives. What had happened to RISD? To the fire? To the relentless dreamer who could spar with him until dawn? The Adele he remembered had been unstoppable. The woman before him was surviving, and he didn't know whether to curse fate or himself for letting it happen. He lingered, the coffee bitter but unimportant, his gaze tracking her in small stolen doses. He saw her slip a slice of pie to the old woman, whispering, "Don't you worry, Martha." He saw the way her smile, faint but genuine, softened the truckers. He also saw the other thing, the man with the sweaty brow, Gregory Peterson, emerging from the office. His badge of authority was a stained apron and a leer. He cornered Adele by the coffee machine, standing in too close. Nate couldn't hear words, but body language spoke plenty. His smirk, his eyes crawling, her stiff jaw, the half-step lean away. She muttered something clipped and brushed past him. A pot of coffee, her shield. Peterson watched her go with a smirk that made Nate's hands curl fists. Rage. Not the heated kind that drove negotiations, but a cold, clean fury. This wasn't about a check to clear. This wasn't about money. Throwing bills at her would only mock the fire he remembered. No. This demanded something else, something strategic, something that restored rather than demeaned. When Adele returned with the check, Nate slid 2 bills onto the table. 200s. She blinked, startled. "Sir, I can't break this. It's not for the bill," he murmured, his face shadowed beneath the cap. "It's for you." And for Martha's pie, he didn't wait for her answer. He slid from the booth, tugged the cap lower, and strode out. The bell chimed his departure. Rain embraced him again, soaking through like penance. Behind him, Adele's eyes widened, but she said nothing. He wasn't a ghost anymore. He was a man with a mission. Adele's fallen star was a puzzle, and he was going to solve it. As for Gregory Peterson, Nate promised himself, in the silence of the storm, that man's days of leering power were numbered. Sleep toyed with Nathaniel Harrington that night, dangling just out of reach like a cruel joke. He lay stretched across a mattress so large it could have housed a family of 4, staring at the skyline glowing through rain-smeared windows. Normally the view comforted him, a reminder of how high he'd climbed, but tonight those glittering towers mocked him. They seemed soulless, brittle things. Every time he shut his eyes, Adele's face appeared. Thinner, tired, still fierce in its bones. The girl who had once lit entire classrooms, with her ambition now serving pie in a diner run by a petty tyrant. The contrast gnawed at him until the very walls of his penthouse felt more like prison bars than glass. He pushed upright, padding barefoot across cold hardwood floors, polished to a mirror. The silence pressed like cotton over his ears, thick and sterile. He remembered her words from high school, flung at him in one of their endless debates, a beautiful but soulless calculator. Back then he had bristled, stung by the insult. Now, surrounded by gleaming furniture chosen by designers and art he'd never actually liked, he wondered if she had prophesied his future. The calculator had become flesh, and she had been right all along. By 5 a.m, resignation replaced insomnia. He padded into his office, a sterile temple of glass and brushed steel. 2 monitors glowed faintly in standby, waiting like patient servants. Nate didn't believe in leaving things to chance. He hadn't built Synapse Dynamics on whimsy. He built it on knowing every variable, predicting every outcome. If Adele Bennett had ended up in that diner, there was a story. He intended to know every chapter. He reached for the encrypted phone number directory listed, a device for matters too delicate for assistance or emails. He pressed a number memorized years ago. It rang twice before a gravelly voice rasped through. "Nate, you do realize the sun isn't even up." "Morning, Arthur." Nate's voice was steady. "I need a file." Full, discreet, comprehensive Arthur Gable had the manner of an old bloodhound who had sniffed every trail and dug up every bone. Officially, he was a risk management consultant. Unofficially, he was the man billionaires called when their secrets grew teeth. "What's the target?" Arthur asked, suspicion in the slow drawl. "Corporate rival? Stolen patents? A Shanghai fund sniffing around your board?" "None of that." "This is personal," Nate said, sharper than intended. "Name's Adele Bennett. About 32. Northwood High, class of 2011. Currently waiting tables at the Corner Spoon on Pike. I want everything. Education, family, finances, employment, medical if you can get it without rattling cages. And Arthur, this isn't hostile. Handle it gentle." A pause waited with surprise. Arthur was used to being asked about executives, tycoons, sharks, not waitresses. But his voice came back calm. "Discreet's my middle name. You'll have something. By evening." Nate ended the call and sagged back in the leather chair, eyes fixed on the blank skyline. His mind buzzed, but underneath it was something deeper. Fear. He feared what the file might tell him. Feared she had collapsed under the weight of mediocrity. Feared the fire really had gone out. Yet part of him, the part that still remembered her sketches alive in the margins of physics homework, whispered she couldn't be broken so easily. The day dragged. He moved through board meetings like a ghost, nodding at graphs he barely saw, feigning interest in projections he didn't hear. Colleagues exchanged wary glances. Was the market troubling him? Was the board leaning too hard? He brushed them off with cool efficiency, but inside tectonic plates were shifting. For the first time in a decade, something mattered more than synapse dynamics. At 5 o'clock sharp, his secure inbox blinked. A file. Subject line. Report on C. Bennett. His pulse hammered. He shut his office door, poured water with hands less steady than usual, and opened it. The first pages were predictable, the life he expected to read. Acceptance into the Rhode Island School of Design, scholarship, full ride, glowing with phrases like prodigious portfolio and singular vision. Grades immaculate, comments praising her gift for drawing concepts that seemed to breathe, work that blurred emotion and design. He pictured her at RISD, surrounded by colors and critics, thriving in the world she had always dreamed of. But then the story bent. Halfway through her second semester, a shadow entered. Her father, David Bennett, diagnosed with Charcot-Marie-Tooth disease, a degenerative nerve disorder, aggressive, relentless. Within months, he couldn't hold a drafting pencil. The insurance policy, cheap, capped, laughably inadequate, crumbled under the cost of specialists and therapies. Bills piled like bricks. Savings went, then retirement funds, then the mortgage. Adele tried to hold her place at school, picking up shifts at cafes, but the distance and weight broke her. Arthur had attached a copy of her withdrawal letter. One sheet, clinical and polite, but soaked in heartbreak. Due to a severe family medical emergency, I must withdraw indefinitely. Indefinitely. The word hit him like a stone. She returned to Seattle, became caretaker for her father, mother, and younger brother Liam. The report laid out the trail in sterile bullet points. Barista, receptionist, temp, clerk, cleaner. Now juggling 2 jobs, mornings at a dry cleaner, nights at the corner spoon. 80-hour weeks, pennies funneled into keeping the family afloat. The home gone, replaced by a cramped apartment in a part of town where streetlights died and no one fixed them. Every dollar pointed at her father's care, every spare cent hidden for Liam's education. And it worked. Liam, now a graduate in computer science from the University of Washington, debt-free. Debt-free because she had shouldered the load alone. Nate's throat closed. He pressed the glass of water against his forehead, blinking hard. The world had tried to grind her down, and she had bent, but not broken. She had carried her family on her back like Atlas, silent, uncelebrated. His chest burned with something between admiration and fury, the injustice of it all. He wanted to smash the glass table, punch holes in the sterile walls. But instead he sat, quiet, because she had endured all this without flinching, while he had been measuring success in profit margins. The file didn't stop there. Arthur had dug into the corner spoon. The manager, Gregory Peterson, was a rot disguised in polyester. Complaints of harassment, wage theft, intimidation. All settled quietly by the owner, brushed under the rug. Nothing stuck. Peterson thrived because his kingdom was too small for newspapers to bother with. But his smirk last night made sense now. He was a predator in a cage of linoleum and grease. Nate closed the file slowly, fingertips pressed to the desk. The decision crystallized. This wasn't about tossing her a lifeline of cash. That would insult the woman she had become, the woman forged in hardship. No, what she needed was restoration, a return of the future stolen from her. And it had to be offered in a way her pride could swallow, through opportunity, not pity. He rose and paced the office, city lights flickering on outside. He thought of her sketches, the way she captured not just faces, but emotions, ideas. Adele never simply drew, she translated. That was her genius. And then it hit him. His foundation. Synapse Dynamics had a philanthropic arm, the Synapse Foundation, a tidy tax shelter dressed in the costume of generosity. It supported STEM in underserved communities, but it had no pulse, no identity. It lacked a story. It lacked soul, just like him. He picked up the phone again, this time dialing through his official lines. "Dr. Reyes," he said, when a clipped voice answered. "It's Harrington. I'm restructuring the Foundation's outreach. We're launching an initiative at the crossroads of art and technology. I want a complete rebrand, new logo, new design language, new narrative, and I'm creating a lead position to guide it." There was a pause, then the crisp voice of Dr. Alani Reyes, his director. "That's sudden, Mr. Harrington. Usually we'd open a search, contract an agency. Do you have a candidate?" "Yes," he said, steel in his tone. "The only candidate, Adele Bennett. Prepare an offer, generous, 6 figures, executive benefits including family medical coverage, relocation stipend, signing bonus, the works. With all due respect," Dr. Reyes ventured cautiously, "that package for an unknown—" "She is not unknown to me," Nate cut in, his voice sharp enough to draw blood. "This isn't a debate. Dig up whatever you can find of her old portfolio, MySpace, DeviantArt, RISD submissions. Call it a discovery. I'll handle the approach. Just have the letter ready tomorrow." So Dr. Reyes hesitated, then agreed. Nate hung up, exhaling slowly. The plan was set. He would not come to her as an old classmate handing down charity. He would come as the CEO who had uncovered a hidden talent. It was a lie, yes, but a lie in service of something true, restoring her life. But one matter remained. Peterson Nate's jaw hardened as he picked up the phone again, this time to his legal counsel. "David," he said, voice dropping to an icy calm, "look into the building that houses the Corner Spoon. I want health code violations, labor infractions, tax filings, everything. Buy the property outright if you can. Find me grounds to terminate Peterson's lease." Quietly, but fast. The storm outside had quieted to drizzle, but inside Nathaniel Harrington, thunder rolled. Rain had returned to Seattle with its usual stubborn persistence, a fine mist that clung to jackets and made headlights blur into smeared halos. Nathaniel Harrington sat in a plain gray Audi parked across the street from the Corner Spoon, a car chosen for its anonymity, not its pedigree. His McLaren waited in a climate-controlled garage, gleaming under halogen lights. But tonight, the idea of sliding behind its wheel felt obscene. He wanted no spectacle, no chrome or flash. He wanted to step into Adele's world without trumpets. He watched through the diner's fogged window, saw her silhouette moving with that weary rhythm he recognized now. It was a dance of endurance, balancing plates, wiping counters, pouring coffee, as if she were some conductor coaxing a half-broken orchestra to keep playing. The bell above the door jangled each time someone came or went, and every sound seemed to echo in his chest. He rehearsed the words he'd prepared, polished like a pitch to venture capitalists. Yet each time he imagined her green eyes on him, his certainty cracked. On the passenger seat lay a slim leather briefcase. Inside, a meticulously drafted employment offer on Synapse Foundation letterhead, complete with signature lines, a salary printed in unapologetic digits, and a packet of her old RISD work Arthur had unearthed from the dark corners of the internet. He had told himself this was business, not sentiment. He had told himself he was here as a CEO, not a boy remembering high school debates and charcoal sketches. Lies had their uses, but the knot in his stomach told him he wasn't lying to anyone but himself. He stepped out, mist pricking his face, damp seeping into his hair despite the cap pulled low. The diner's neon sign sputtered weakly, buzzing like an insect caught in a jar. He opened the door. The bell chimed. Warm air washed over him, thick with grease, burnt coffee, and damp wool. Adele was behind the counter, back turned, wiping at a coffee machine with the kind of stubborn diligence only exhaustion can produce. "Find a seat anywhere," she said, without glancing up, her tone brisk, professional. He took a steadying breath. "Actually, I was hoping to speak with you, Miss Bennett." The rag in her hand stilled. She froze. Slowly she turned, and when her eyes landed on him, recognition hit like a physical blow. Shock flared first, then something more complicated. Confusion, wariness, and a flicker of that old sharpness. She wiped her hands on her apron, suddenly self-conscious of grease stains and fraying hems. "Nathaniel Harrington," she said, her voice a whisper dragged from a decade ago. "What on earth are you doing here?" He tried a smile, careful and small, the kind you offer a skittish animal. "Hello, Adele. Been a while?" She gave a short laugh, brittle as cracked glass. "A decade and a few $1 billion if the papers are to be believed." The sarcasm came sharp, but he caught the embarrassment beneath it. Her shoulders stiffened, as if bracing against invisible judgment. "If this is about the tip, you really didn't have to do that." It was too much. "It's not about that," he said quickly, "and it was the least I could do." He gestured to the booth he had occupied days before. "May I sit?" "This isn't a conversation for standing in a diner aisle." Her eyes darted around the half-empty room, calculating exits, perhaps measuring how long 5 minutes could feel. Finally, she gave a curt nod toward the booth. "Fine. 5 minutes. I'm on the clock." They slid into opposite sides of the booth. The vinyl sighed beneath their weight, and for a moment the air between them vibrated with tension. A thread pulled taut. She crossed her arms over her chest like armor, eyes sharp, waiting. "To what do I owe the honor?" she asked, chin tilted. Sudden craving for coffee that costs less than a parking meter. He nearly smiled. That wit. Still alive, though dulled by fatigue. He leaned forward. "I remember a time you told me my taste was tragically underdeveloped. It seems you still believe that." A flicker of surprise crossed her face. She remembered. Her lips twitched despite herself. "I was a teenager. I was an idiot." "You were brilliant," he corrected softly. "The smartest person at Northwood. And you know it." That knocked her off balance. She looked away, eyes finding the rain streaking down the window. "A lot of good it did me." "Look, Nate, I appreciate the stroll down memory lane, but I'm working. What do you want?" This was the moment. He opened the briefcase and slid the folder across the table. "I'm here on business. My business." She eyed it as if it might bite. "Business," she repeated, voice flat. "The Synapse Foundation is undergoing a major rebrand. We're looking for authenticity, for someone who can bridge art and technology, someone who understands struggle, who can translate humanity into design. Our HR team unearthed some of your old work, your RISD application pieces, the metamorphosis sketches, the cityscapes. Raw, but visionary, exactly what we need." Her expression tightened. She didn't touch the folder. "Impossible. Those drawings are buried. No one should even have them. The internet never forgets," he said with a shrug, though inside he hated the lie. "We're creating a new role. Lead concept artist. You'd shape the foundation's visual identity from scratch. It comes with full salary benefits, and complete creative freedom. At last she lowered her gaze, opened the folder. The offer letter stared back in stark black and white, a six-figure sum printed without apology. She let out a laugh, sharp and humorless. "This is a joke." She pushed the folder back as if it were poison. "This is pity dressed up as an offer." The billionaire swoops in to rescue the poor waitress. "I don't want your charity," her voice shook, trembling with pride and fury all tangled together. "It's not charity," he insisted, leaning in, his voice earnest. "It's a real job, Adele. A role that needs your talent. The benefits are standard for executives. The salary matches the position. This is not a handout." Her eyes blazed. For the first time, he saw the fire he remembered from debate club, sharp and relentless. "Why me?" There are thousands of artists in Seattle, people with portfolios, with degrees, with networks. Why me, a waitress who hasn't touched charcoal in years? He hesitated. The polished script he had prepared frayed at the edges. She deserved a truth, if not the whole one. He drew a breath. "Because I owe you." Confusion flickered across her face. "Owe me for what?" "The Harrison Grant." His voice dropped. The name hung in the air like a ghost. The scholarship that had set his future in motion. They had been the finalists, neck and neck, and his name had been called. He had watched her smile, polite, brave, hiding the gut punch. Her eyes narrowed, suspicion mingled with pain. "What about it?" "I know you thought I won because of test scores," he said, voice low, steady. "But there was more. An essay, a review of financial need. What no one knew was that my family was crumbling at the time. My father's business was on its knees. We were close to losing the house. That scholarship wasn't just ambition, it was survival. I wrote like my life depended on it, because it did, and I won. But I knew you deserved it just as much, maybe more. I've carried that guilt for years." He let the words settle, raw and unvarnished. "This isn't charity for who you are now. It's balance, Adele. A chance to restore what should have always been yours. You're not just an artist. You're someone who understands sacrifice, resilience. That's what the foundation needs." For a long moment, she just stared. The anger wavered. Confusion, hurt, understanding fought across her face. He could almost see the weight of old wounds shifting. Then the kitchen door swung open. Peterson emerged, wiping greasy hands on his apron. His eyes landed on the booth, narrowed. "Bennett," he barked, "table 4 needs a check. Coffee's low." His gaze slid to Nate, assessing, oily. "This guy bothering you?" Adele flinched, shoulders curling inward. Before she could answer, Nate stood, his full height casting a shadow over the manager. His voice, calm and lethal, carried the authority of boardrooms where billions hung in the balance. "There's no problem. Adele and I are concluding a business meeting, her last here, as it happens. She's considering a position with my company." Peterson snorted, crossing thick arms. "A new position? What, cleaning your mansion?" Nate's smile was thin, cold. "She will earn more in a month than you make in a year. And I'd choose your next words carefully. I own the building this diner squats in, and I'm suddenly very interested in the morality clause of your lease." The color drained from Peterson's face. He sputtered, opened his mouth, then thought better. He turned back toward the kitchen, shoulders hunched. Nate turned again to Adele. Her eyes were wide, astonished. He had not only offered her a lifeline, he had slain one of her dragons in broad daylight. He lowered his voice. "Come for an interview tomorrow. Meet the foundation's director. See the offices. No commitment, Just see what your life could be. He slid the folder back to her side. The offer stands. I hope you'll consider it. He left her there, the bell chiming softly as the door closed behind him. Adele sat frozen, the folder open before her, a world tilting. The rain outside drummed steady, but inside her chest, a different storm was gathering. Fear, hope, longing, and the terrifying knowledge that everything could change. The Synapse Dynamics headquarters wasn't a building so much as a declaration of war against gravity. 48 stories of glass and steel clawed skyward, the kind of architecture that seemed to sneer at the very idea of restraint. Adele Bennett stood at its base the next morning, head tilted back, clutching a thrift store blazer that smelled faintly of mothballs and lavender sachet. Her stomach fluttered. She felt like a trespasser at the gates of a kingdom, one hand still smelling faintly of dish soap from the morning shift she'd left behind. She nearly turned around twice before stepping inside. The lobby swallowed her whole, polished marble stretching in every direction, ceilings so high they seemed to mock the very idea of smallness. Light poured in from windows that could have doubled as cinema screens, bouncing off brushed metal fixtures that hummed with modernity. There were no grease stains here, no half-dead neon. Everything gleamed. A woman in a slate gray suit intercepted her before she even reached the desk, tablet in hand, smile honed to efficiency. Miss Bennett? Welcome to Synapse Dynamics. Mr. Harrington is expecting you. Dr. Reyes will meet you on the 48th floor. The elevator doors whispered open, swallowing her into a capsule lined with chrome. As it rocketed upward, her ears popped. She caught her reflection in the mirrored walls, hair pulled into a serviceable bun, blazer sitting stiffly on her shoulders, knuckles white around the strap of her bag. She looked like a girl wearing her mother's clothes, pretending at belonging. When the doors opened, the air itself felt different. This wasn't the sterile corporate heart of Synapse. This was the foundation, and it breathed warmer. Walls paneled in pale wood, living plants spilling from vertical gardens, large windows framing Puget Sound, where sunlight glanced off restless waves. It smelled faintly of citrus and fresh paper, not grease and burnt coffee. It was a space waiting for a soul. Miss Bennett. The voice belonged to Dr. Alani Reyes, a woman in her 50s with silver-streaked hair pulled neatly back and eyes that could pierce and soothe in the same glance. She shook Adele's hand firmly, with the kind of grip that said she didn't bother with half measures. I've heard much about you. From Mr. Harrington? Adele asked, wary. From his insistence, Reyes corrected, a smile playing at her lips. He's not often adamant, but when he is, he tends to be right. There was no interview, not really. Dr. Reyes gave a tour instead, pointing out blank walls, empty offices, spaces meant for something more. This floor is the foundation's canvas, she said, pausing in a sunlit corner office, and Mr. Harrington believes you're the one to paint it. Quite literally, if you wish. Adele looked out the window. Below, the city sprawled, gray and stubborn, but from up here, it seemed almost manageable, like a puzzle she might arrange piece by piece. Terror and exhilaration warred inside her. For the first time in years, someone wasn't asking her to endure, to survive, to clean up. They were asking her to imagine. She took the job. Leaving the corner spoon was less theatrical than she'd imagined during countless exhausted nights. Peterson was on shift when she arrived, his face shiny with grease and authority. She set her apron on the counter. "I resign," she said simply. He blinked, as if the word required translation. "Effective when?" "Immediately." For once he had no smirk, no sneer. Maybe Nate's shadow still hung over him, or maybe the realization that he'd lost his favorite target had landed. He nodded, mumbling something that sounded like, "Good luck," but couldn't meet her eyes. She didn't bother correcting him. On her way out, Adele spotted Martha, the elderly woman who lived on endless refills of tea and kindness. Adele slipped a folded bill onto her saucer, leaned down, and whispered, "The pie's on me for the next month." Martha's eyes filled, her hand trembling over Adele's. That look was worth more than any grand exit speech. The weeks that followed were a blur. Her first paycheck landed, more money than she'd ever seen in one place. The numbers didn't feel real, and yet they translated into very real things. A specialized home care nurse for her father, who now smiled without the shadow of constant pain. A brighter condo near Volunteer Park with windows that let in light instead of mildew. Liam unpacking boxes in his own room, shoulders unbowed for the first time in years. And Adele, for the first time since RISD, stood before a blank canvas without guilt gnawing at her heels. Her office filled with sketches and mock-ups, lines of charcoal smudging her fingers again. She redesigned the Foundation's logo, transforming Synapse's cold circuitry into two abstract hands reaching toward each other, elegant and human. She scrawled concepts on whiteboards, drew on walls, even painted when the mood struck. Her creativity, starved for a decade, surged like a river after the thaw. The Foundation transformed around her. Campaigns bore her touch. Brochures, websites, murals in community centers. People noticed. Employees stopped in her office just to watch her sketch. Donors spoke of the new soul of Synapse. And Nate, standing in her doorway one afternoon, had simply said, "I knew you still had it in you." Their relationship settled into a rhythm that felt both dangerous and inevitable. Lunches in the executive canteen turned into long conversations about art, science, and the absurdities of success. He confessed to her once, half amused, half bitter, that he sometimes felt like a man who'd tricked the world into crowning him king. She confessed that she still felt like a waitress pretending in a borrowed blazer. They laughed, and in the spaces between laughter, something fragile bloomed. Yet beneath the bloom, there was always the hum of tension. He looked at her, not as an employee, but as a peer, an equal, sometimes even as something more. She caught it in the way his gaze lingered, in the pauses that stretched a fraction too long. She tried to ignore the way her pulse quickened in response. After all, she was rebuilding her life, not stepping into another entanglement. But hearts seldom follow the logic that minds draft. And for the first time in a very long while, Adele Bennett allowed herself to hope. Damien Croft had the sort of face that looked carved out of stone, the kind quarried to build fortresses rather than churches. Where Nathaniel Harrington's empire had been built on elegance, Croft's fortune came from blunt force. His company, Aryan Systems, was a predator in the corporate wild, and Croft himself the kind of man who saw contracts as battlefields and competitors as prey. For years, Synapse Dynamics had been the thorn in his paw. Nate's compression algorithm was the crown jewel of modern data, an unbreakable cipher of efficiency that Aryan had tried and failed to replicate. Croft had thrown money at the problem like a gambler, doubling down, hiring the brightest minds, bribing, even dabbling in industrial espionage. But the code had held airtight. He hated Harrington for it, not with the theatrical jealousy of rivals, but with the cold, festering rage of a man denied a prize he believed rightfully his. So when word reached him through his network of informants about the Synapse Foundation's new lead concept artist, an untested woman plucked straight from obscurity with a suspiciously close connection to Harrington, Croft leaned forward in his leather chair. He asked for a file, and when the report came back, he smiled. It was not a kind smile. Adele Bennett, once a promising artist, now a waitress, a story dripping with redemption. To Croft, it smelled of vulnerability. People who had been given everything suddenly often clung to it with both hands. People like that could be nudged, tempted, or if need be, used. Find me an angle, he told his head of operations. A hook she can't resist. They invented one out of whole cloth. The Vanguard Contemporary Art Gallery. Website gleaming. Portfolio of artists fabricated. Testimonials borrowed from real critics, but altered just enough to avoid suspicion. They even built a social media presence, though just skeletal enough to seem exclusive. The bait needed to look rare, not desperate, and to reel her in, they crafted Sebastian, the charming, erudite curator with a taste for undiscovered genius. His emails dripped with warmth, sprinkled with just enough pretentious jargon to sound authentic. The trap was set. It began innocuously, an email to Adele's personal account, not her Synapse inbox. A glowing introduction. A note that an anonymous scout had shown them her RISD portfolio. A line that said they were captivated. Would she be interested in discussing a solo exhibition in New York? When Adele first saw it, her heart lurched so violently she had to sit down. She read it twice, then a third time. Her hands trembled. A solo exhibition. Words that once had been the apex of her dream. But caution clawed at her too. She had been out of that world for a decade. Her portfolio was buried under layers of dust and regret. Who would suddenly care now? She showed Nate over coffee, voice careful, as though even speaking the words might shatter them. It's probably nothing, she said, trying to choke down the hope rising in her chest. A scam, maybe. Too good to be true. Nate's eyes lit up, unguarded. Adele, it's not too good to be true. Your work is extraordinary. Of course, a gallery would want it. We'll have the legal team look over any contracts. You should pursue this. His faith in her was so absolute it washed away some of her doubt. She found herself replying, fingers hovering over the keys longer than necessary. Sebastian responded almost instantly, his words smooth as silk. He spoke of the gallery's exclusivity, of collectors eager for fresh vision, of media hungry for stories of resilience. He called her a rare voice, a phoenix. Each email tugged at threads woven deep in her soul. They graduated from emails to calls. His voice was cultured, enthusiastic. He spoke of white walls bathed in light, of her pieces framed in minimalist oak, of critics murmuring in awe. He laughed in the right places, knew enough about RISD to sound credible. She began to believe. At night, she lay awake imagining canvases hung in Manhattan, crowds milling, Nate perhaps at her side in a tailored suit. The life that might have been, but was now offered again. The temptation was unbearable. Then came the request. Polite, professional, wrapped in flattery. Our design team is preparing the exhibition catalog, Sebastian wrote. We'll need your full high-resolution portfolio. Even old pieces, especially those. We want to showcase your entire arc. I've attached a link to our secure gallery server. Simply Upload your files into a folder with your name. The server is encrypted end to end. For your protection, Adele read it twice. It seemed legitimate. The portal looked clean, professional. She hesitated, then rationalized. Galleries did need files. She could almost hear Nate's voice. "We'll have legal review," but excitement drowned caution. That night, working late in her office high above Puget Sound, she clicked the link. A login appeared. She typed her name, created a password, and began uploading. Sketches, paintings, RISD projects, even some new concepts she had been developing for the foundation. The progress bar crawled. She watched each file vanish into the ether, her pulse racing as though each click carried her closer to New York. When it finished, she closed the laptop, smiling, heart swelling with fragile hope. She sent Sebastian a brief note. Then she packed her bag and went home, her thoughts awhirl with gallery lights and critics' praise. She didn't know she had just opened the door to the wolf. The Trojan moved fast. The moment she logged out, the program buried itself deep in her machine, silent as a burglar slipping through shadows. It crawled past firewalls, tricked security protocols with mimicry so precise it was almost beautiful. Using her credentials, it slid through Synapse's veins like poison, heading straight for the heart, the compression algorithm, Nate's crown jewel, the key to his empire. At 3:17 a.m., a demon Nate himself had coded stirred awake. It flagged anomalies in packet flow, spikes in data transfer, credentials running when the workstation should have been idle. Silent alarms screamed across encrypted channels. By 3:20, Nate's phone buzzed on his nightstand. He answered before the first ring ended. "Sir," his head of cybersecurity said, voice taut, "we've detected a breach, large-scale exfiltration." Originating from the foundation's floor, Nate was already out of bed, pulling on clothes. Source? Executive credentials, senior level. Files are moving to an untraceable server in Eastern Europe. We're containing, but damage is severe. By 3:37, Nate strode into the security command center, the room awash in blue light from a wall of monitors. Analysts hunched over keyboards, the air thick with tension and the faint buzz of overworked servers. On the main screen, a breadcrumb trail of digital footprints glowed. The security chief pointed. The breach originated from workstation 48. User: Bennett, Adele. Credentials verified. She uploaded to an external server, then the Trojan spread. Nate stared, the name burning into his retinas. Adele Bennett. The screen showed her login. Timestamps precise to the second, files streaming out like lifeblood siphoned from a body. The evidence was damning, ironclad. His throat tightened. Check again. Logs, activity history, anything they did. It was all there. Her workstation, her credentials, the external link. To the system, to anyone, it was open and shut espionage. Company protocol was clear. Immediate termination, legal escalation, federal involvement. No exceptions. Already the board had been notified, voices rising on secure lines, demanding heads roll. But Nate stood frozen, caught between two realities. One, the data, his lifelong god, the flawless language he trusted above all, screamed her guilt. The other, the memory of her weary smile in the diner, the fire in her eyes as she sketched again, the honesty in her voice, whispered her innocence. The board wanted a traitor's scalp. The company demanded blood. Nate's heart demanded something else. The boardroom at Synapse Dynamics had gone quiet enough to hear the hum of the fluorescent fixtures overhead, though the quiet was not peace, but something closer to the hush in a storm's eye. Screens still glowed with their damning graphs. Activity logs, timestamps, transfer confirmations. Each bright blue panel screamed the same name in digital ink, Adele Bennett. To the men and women around the table, there was nothing left to debate. A thief had been caught, and their fury demanded a swift hanging. Yet Nathaniel Harrington stood with both palms pressed flat on the cool, polished wood, spine bowed but unbroken, his face cast in that deadly calm reserved for gamblers who had just shoved their entire fortune into the center of the table. His eyes, gray as an oncoming squall, moved from face to face without blinking. "The investigation," he said, voice low, "does not leave this room for 24 hours. I will shoulder the responsibility. Not a whisper to the press, not a syllable to federal regulators. Anyone who violates this order finds their key card deactivated before sunrise." There was muttering, protests dressed in polite corporate language, but no one dared challenge the man who had turned lines of code into a kingdom. He had made careers, ended them, and kept score with an almost biblical memory. Even those who wanted Adele's head on a platter swallowed their anger. One by one, screens were dimmed, laptops snapped shut, but the air stayed sharp as broken glass. Nate didn't linger. He left the room with his jaw locked, heading for the underground garage where machines slept like leashed beasts. The McLaren gleamed under the soft lights, but tonight its polish seemed vulgar. Instead, he swung a leg over the Ducati, helmet in one hand, rain slicker clinging to his shoulders. When the engine roared to life, it was less a machine than a scream against the betrayal clawing at his chest. He opened the throttle, and Seattle's wet streets blurred by, neon smeared like bruises across his visor. By the time he reached the condo tower, he had arranged for Adele and her family. The rain had tapered to a mist, leaving the pavement slick and glistening. He climbed the steps 2 at a time, muscles strung tight, and knocked. It was Adele who answered, her face lit with the kind of radiance he had not seen in years. Behind her, laughter spilled from the living room. Her father smiling, her brother raising a glass of soda in the celebration, the air thick with hope and warmth. She had a folder clutched to her chest, the supposed gallery contract, and she said, breathless, "Nate, you won't believe it. They've confirmed the exhibition. A real show. New York." My own walls, her joy stabbed him, crueler than any knife. He looked past her into that room of fragile happiness, then back at her, and his voice came out cold and stripped of comfort. "Adele, we need to speak." Alone she frowned, confused by his flatness, but led him to the balcony where the city hummed below, mist curling like smoke through the yellow glow of street lamps. "What's wrong?" she asked. He didn't soften. "The gallery isn't real. At 9:15 last night, while you uploaded your work, a Trojan horse bled into our systems. Synapse's core algorithm was copied, line by line. The breach traces directly to your credentials, your machine." For a heartbeat, she just stared. Then the color drained from her face, as if someone had pulled a plug. Her body swayed against the railing, knuckles white where they clutched metal. No, that's impossible," she whispered. "I only wanted to send them my drawings. That's all." Oh God. Her knees gave, and she pressed both palms to her mouth, eyes filling with horror. It was not the expression of a thief caught red-handed. It was the shattering of someone whose dream had been twisted into a weapon. The sobs tore from her chest, raw and unguarded. "I've ruined everything. You gave me this chance, and I've destroyed it." Nate's heart clenched, and all the glowing screens with their perfect logic could go straight to hell. He pulled her upright by the shoulders, forcing her to meet his gaze. "Listen to me. I don't believe you betrayed me, but I need you to think. Did anything about the link, the process, strike you as odd?" Through her tears, she struggled to remember. Her mind was fog, then suddenly she froze. "Liam," she said hoarsely, "my brother glanced at the upload. He mentioned something about the server. It sounded strange." Nate didn't wait. He strode back into the condo and called Liam out from the small celebration. The young man appeared, nervous at the sight of Nate's face, but he straightened. "What's going on?" "That link from the gallery," Nate demanded. "You said something about it." Liam rubbed the back of his neck. It wasn't standard. The port protocol looked disguised, masked to look secure, but it was like someone had built a fake door on a real house. I didn't think much of it at the time. It was the crack Nate needed, a loose thread in the careful tapestry of lies. He turned back to Adele, whose eyes clung to his as though the ground beneath her feet had vanished. "Stay here. Lock the door. Speak to no one," he ordered. "Liam, you're coming with me." For the next 18 hours, the office at Synapse turned into something between a war bunker and a monastery. Screens lit the room with a harsh blue glow, illuminating their faces as they bent over lines of code that slithered across displays. Adele sat outside, silent, while inside Liam proved himself a sharp mind, tracing the infection's steps like a tracker following prints in mud. Arthur Gable joined them, gravel-voiced and calm, his fingers moving with the patience of a surgeon as he cross-referenced corporate whispers. At last, between Liam's technical eye and Arthur's shadowy channels, the truth surfaced. The Trojan bore the faint watermark of Nyx, a mercenary hacker collective. And Nyx's unofficial patron was a name that needed no introduction: Damien Croft. Nate leaned back, exhaustion and fury warring in his chest. Croft had circled him for years, scavenging at the edges of Synapse like a vulture waiting for weakness. Now he had tried to turn Adele into the knife that would gut Nate's empire. It was audacious, almost poetic. But Croft had underestimated two things: Nate's refusal to surrender Adele and his willingness to fight dirty. "We can't just prove her innocence," Nate said slowly, fingers tapping the desk. "We need to destroy him. Once. Completely." The plan was born out of equal parts brilliance and rage. Using Adele's supposed compromised credentials as bait, they built a honeypot file, a gleaming jewel labeled Synapse Ethel Algorithm Key. Buried within Croft's own network by Arthur's quiet hand, it shimmered like contraband gold. All they had to do was wait for greed to do the rest. It didn't take long. Croft had always been too proud to resist temptation. Within 3 hours, his own keystrokes reached for the forbidden file. The moment he opened it, alarms hidden inside the code sang in silence. The FBI's cybercrime division, tipped off and waiting, moved like wolves on a signal. Simultaneously, a logic bomb unfolded inside Aryan Systems servers, unraveling years of research into useless fragments. By dawn, Croft's empire was a smoldering digital ruin, and federal agents were marching him out of his glass tower in handcuffs. His curse-ridden shouts were captured by every camera in the street, the mighty reduced to a spectacle. At Synapse, the fallout was immediate. Adele's name was cleared in public view. She was lauded not as a traitor, but as the unwitting lure in a trap that had gutted their greatest rival. Liam, still reeling, was appointed co-head of the new cybersecurity division. his quick eye credited with catching the subtle flaws in the Trojan. But Adele, she stood before the press pale, hands trembling, as Nate declared her innocence. The cameras flashed, and she felt both vindicated and hollow. The world now knew her as the woman nearly undone by a dream too fragile to survive the claws of men like Croft. That evening, as the building quieted, she found Nate in the high windows of his office. The city stretched below like a restless animal. He turned when she entered, and the hard lines of command softened. "All the data," he murmured, "told me you were guilty." Every scrap of logic, every number. He paused, eyes dark and weary. "But I chose you instead." She stepped closer, her voice steady though her chest still carried the ache of recent terror. "And I chose to trust that you would." Between them there was no gala applause, no corporate theater, just two people, stripped bare by fire, learning the strange weight of faith. He reached for her hand, and she let him take it. Not as billionaire and waitress, not as savior and saved, but as something quieter and more binding. Partners who had stood against the storm and still breathed. Seattle woke to a gray dawn that seemed no different from 100 others. Mist hugging the streets, buses groaning awake, and the air carrying that mix of salt from the Sound and diesel from the port. Yet for Adele Bennett, the city looked utterly transformed. The weight on her chest, the one she had carried for 10 long years, had shifted. She was no longer waiting tables for men who leered or scraping by on tips that barely covered groceries. She was walking through the polished halls of Synapse's foundation wing with her sketchbook under one arm and a badge that unlocked more doors than she had ever dared imagine. Concrete actions came first. She signed off on design drafts, sat in meetings with engineers who looked bewildered, but intrigued at the way she described circuits in colors and shapes, and spread her drawings across tables like a general unrolling maps of a war she fully intended to win. Her office smelled faintly of cedar from the plant wall outside, sunlight angling across the desk in slants that turned her charcoal lines to silver. Yet beneath each action was the pulse of her disbelief. She caught herself waiting for someone to shout that it was a mistake, that the girl who quit art school had no right to this seat. But no one did. Instead, they nodded, they listened. They called her Miss Bennett, and in the mirror she began to see not the tired waitress, but the artist she had once promised herself she'd become. Nate, meanwhile, moved through his empire like a man who had tasted his own mortality. Outwardly, he was steady as ever, shaking hands in boardrooms, running numbers in his head with that surgical precision. But inside something had shifted. He had seen how fragile his kingdom really was. A few keystrokes, a poisoned dream, and everything could have been ash. At night, in the echoing silence of his penthouse, he thought less about profits and more about the choice he had made in the blue-lit security center. Data had told him one truth, his heart another. For the first time, he had turned his back on the god of evidence. And that decision had saved him more than his company. It had saved the last decent piece of himself. The world, of course, was quick to build its story. Newspapers splashed Croft's downfall across front pages, portraying Nate as the unshakable titan who had stared down betrayal and triumphed. Investors cheered, regulators nodded, and Synapse stock climbed like ivy on a brick wall. But the private story, the one lived in quiet moments between two people, had no headline. It was told in sideways glances when Nate passed Adele's office and lingered longer than necessary. in the way her laughter softened around him, though it still carried an edge of caution. And in the evenings they sometimes shared over coffee, never champagne, always coffee, where they spoke not of numbers or strategy, but of the strange ache of dreams deferred. One such evening found them at the park outside Adele's new condo, the grass damp with dew, and the city lights stretched like a necklace around the bay. Adele's father, restored by professional care, was at home watching baseball. Liam was buried in code at Synapse, exhilarated by work that no longer carried the taste of guilt. Adele and Nate sat on a bench, paper cups in hand, the smell of roasted beans mingling with wet earth. "I keep thinking," Adele said, eyes on the fog shifting over the sound, "how close I came to losing it all. Not just the job, everything. My family's faith in me, your trust, even myself. It was one click, Nate. One dream dangled in front of me, and I walked right into it." He turned the cup slowly in his hands, listening to the ripple of his own unease. "Everyone has a key," he said finally. "Croft thought he found yours. He didn't count on you having something he could never fake." "And what's that?" she asked, glancing at him with a brow half raised. "Your heart," he said simply. "When it broke on that balcony, I knew. A thief doesn't shatter like that. A thief calculates. You felt it too deep. That's why I believed." Her throat tightened at the memory, the railing cold under her hands, the dream collapsing in her chest. She looked away, blinking hard. "Belief doesn't erase the fact I was reckless." "I should have known better." "Maybe," Nate said, a wry smile touching his mouth. "But then again, maybe the only crime was wanting something too much. That's a sentence we're all guilty of." The silence between them wasn't empty. It brimmed with the things neither quite dared say. For Nate, it was the knowledge that he was falling, not with the wild freefall of youth, but with the deliberate surrender of a man who had spent his life holding control like a shield. For Adele, it was the tremor of hope, fragile and frightening, that maybe this storm had carved out space for something more than survival. Time passed. Weeks folded into months, and Adele's work began to bloom across the city. The Foundation's new identity, colors drawn from her restless sketches, shapes that suggested connection rather than conquest, appeared on billboards, on brochures, on the banners of conferences that once would never have spoken her name. Each time she saw her designs in the world, she felt both pride and the sting of disbelief, as though she were trespassing in a life meant for someone else. But the pride grew louder. Her father's health stabilized. He walked more now, sometimes down to the corner bakery, where the owner greeted him by name. Liam thrived in his new role, his code dissecting threats before they reached the company's gates. At family dinners, Adele sometimes caught her brother watching her with quiet gratitude, a recognition of all she had sacrificed for him. She pretended not to notice, but inside, the old bitterness began to heal. Nate, for his part, found himself in unfamiliar territory. The man who had always been 2 steps ahead, who measured risk with a slide rule in his head, discovered that no algorithm could predict what Adele might say or how her smile might undo his carefully laid defenses. He wrestled with it, tried to bury it under the avalanche of business, but it returned at board meetings when she presented a design with quiet fire, in quiet elevators when her shoulder brushed his by accident, and in the raw honesty of their late-night talks. One evening, after a particularly long day, he found her still in her office, barefoot, hair falling loose, a charcoal smudge across her cheek. She was leaning over a canvas, sketching furiously under the glow of the desk lamp. He stood in the doorway watching. Not as a CEO, not as a man with an empire, but as a boy who once admired a girl in physics class and never truly stopped. "You know," he said softly, breaking the silence, "you make this whole place feel human. Before you, it was just steel and circuits. Beautiful, but soulless. Like me?" She looked up, startled, then smiled faintly, though her eyes searched his face for the weight behind his words. "Maybe you were just waiting for the right sketch." Their laughter, quiet and hesitant, carried the promise of something neither dared name outright. But if the storm had passed, it left scars. Croft's downfall had sent ripples through the industry. Competitors circled, regulators sharpened their knives, and Synapse was watched with suspicion. Nate knew that trust, once shaken, was never fully restored. He poured himself into shoring up defenses, into building alliances. But at night, he carried the knowledge that his empire had nearly collapsed because he dared to care for one woman. It frightened him, and it freed him. The final turn came months later at the Foundation's gala, the first held under Adele's new vision. The hall was awash in warm light, walls hung with her designs, bold sweeping images that spoke of resilience and connection. Guests moved among them murmuring admiration, glasses of wine catching the glow. Adele stood at the center, wearing a simple black dress that made her look less like an executive and more like the artist she had always been. When she took the stage to speak, her voice trembled at first, then steadied. She spoke not of algorithms or markets, but of second chances, of the power of art to give shape to hope. And in the crowd, Nate watched her with something dangerously close to awe. When the applause rose, echoing in the vaulted hall, he realized the truth that had stalked him for months. His worth was no longer measured by towers of glass or lines of code. It was here, in this woman who had survived storms fiercer than anything the market could throw, in the fragile trust they had built. After the speeches, amid the swell of music and the murmur of guests, he found her on a balcony overlooking the city. The night air was cool, scented with rain and the faint tang of the sound. She leaned against the railing, her eyes on the skyline. "Quite a storm we walked through," he said quietly. She glanced at him, lips curved in a smile that held both weariness and wonder. "And yet, here we are." He hesitated, then stepped closer, his hand brushing hers. "Adele, I don't know what the future holds. But I know this. When every chart told me to cut you loose, I couldn't. I won't. Not ever." Her fingers turned, threading with his, and her voice came soft, almost a whisper. "Then maybe it's time to stop running from it." They stood like that. The city stretched below. Two people who had once been rivals in high school classrooms, now bound by a trust that had outlived betrayal, greed, and fear. The storm had not broken them. It had remade them. And so the story that began on a rain-lashed night in a diner ended not with victory parades or fortunes tally, but with something quieter, sturdier. The knowledge that a person's worth is never the weight of their bank account, nor the titles stamped on their office doors, but the grit of their resilience and the stubborn, beautiful act of trusting when all reason says not to.